Last night, you spent 2 hours deciding what to wear to the party. This morning, it'll take you 2 minutes to list it on Depop and make your money back. Just grab your phone, snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. The sheer dress and platform heels you'll never wear again? There's a birthday girl searching for them right now. Your one and done look is about to pay for your next night out. Or at least the ride home. Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Pros, just because something on the job runs out doesn't mean you have to. Order it on the Lowe's app. My Lowe's Pro Rewards members get free same-day delivery on eligible orders over $25. Get the fasteners, hardware, or tools you need to keep the job moving. Order by 2 p.m. and get eligible in-stock items delivered right to your job site by 8 p.m. Members get more at Lowe's. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Subject to availability. Restrictions and terms at lowes.com/shipping terms. Subject to change.
I think that when we look at this book and we think about, okay, what would my dad have said about it? He would always talk about just the camp, and then he started eventually talking about his life. And talking about his life was difficult. He was in accounting. You know, he was very much into numbers, not stories. He was a very good storyteller, but it's something where I think that I wish you could have seen it. I wish I could have heard from him what exactly he felt about it. And I think that's one of the joys of a book. It's the words are there, they're fixed, they're finite, but the interpretations are infinite. And I would hope that he could, that people can get their life, their story out of his story. And I think that's what he'd want to.
Hey everyone, I'm Bianca Schulze, founder of the Children's Book Review, and this is the Growing Readers podcast. Some books arrive in the world carrying the full weight of history, and Unbreakable is one of them. Today, I'm sitting down with co-writer Jolene Gutiérrez and John Tonai, son of the late Minoru Tonai, who was Jolene's co-writer and whose lived story is at the heart of this extraordinary picture book. Jolene Gutiérrez is an award-winning teacher librarian who has spent nearly 3 decades working with neurodivergent learners. She first learned about the Amache Incarceration Camp, not in a classroom, but from her grandparents, who lived just down the road from it. That personal connection never left her, and it ultimately led her to partner with Minoru Tonai to bring his family's story to young readers. Jolene is the author of many books for children, including Too Much, The Ofrenda That We Built, and hopefully you've listened to our episode discussing her picture book, Mamiachi and Me. John Tonai is the son of Minoru, also known as Min, and Mary Tonai. Min and his family were incarcerated at Amache, Colorado, while his mother's family was imprisoned at Poston, Arizona. Unlike many other Japanese American families, John and his sisters grew up hearing about the incarceration and how it affected their families. This early exposure to his family's involvement with the camp has led to a life of documenting, advocating for, and educating people about the Japanese American confinement sites. John is a digitization specialist at the Japanese American National Museum. He's currently on the board of the Amache Alliance and has worked with the Terminal Island Memorial Monument Committee and the Santa Anita Temporary Detention Center memorialization effort. He was the Fine Artist Facilitator and interviewer for the 2020 Tadaima Virtual Pilgrimage and set up survivor interviews for the 2021 Amache Virtual Pilgrimage. Min was born in 1929 and was a Japanese American rights activist who, along with his family, was incarcerated at Amache from 1942 to 1945. For the rest of his life, Min dedicated himself to making sure that story was never forgotten. He spoke to students across schools and universities, founded the Amache Historical Society, served as the board president of the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center, and in 2015 was honored by Japanese Emperor Akihito with the Order of the Rising Sun Medal for his work promoting understanding between Japan and the United States. Min passed away in 2023 before this book was published. But his 3 children, Susan, John, and Teresa, have carried his story forward with tremendous love and care. John joins Jolene today to share what it has meant to grow up with this history, to hold this finished book in their hands, and to help his father's voice reach a whole new generation of readers. This conversation moved me deeply, and I hope it does the same for you. Before I share our conversation, here's the book synopsis for the picture book, Unbreakable, a Japanese American family in an American incarceration camp. A powerful, emotional, and ultimately uplifting picture book about the real-life experience of a Japanese-American boy incarcerated with his family during World War II. Co-written by Minoru Min Tonai, an advocate for Japanese-American rights, Unbreakable is based on Tonai's harrowing real-life experiences and has been welcomed with 4-starred reviews. This moving picture book includes extensive back matter, information on the American incarceration camps and the campaign to release Tonai's father, a timeline, a bibliography, author and illustrator notes, and questions for further discussion. Perfect for caregivers and educators to further engage young readers. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, strength comes in the form of the small, smooth stone Min's father gives him before being led away by FBI agents. In his absence, Min and his family do their best to keep their produce business afloat and earn enough support to get Min's father released. But the FBI won't release his father, and soon, Min and his family are forced into an incarceration camp in Colorado, imprisoned on the dusty plains and facing both the pain of displacement and the injustice of being incarcerated by his own country. Min must learn to adapt and to find beauty and strength where most wouldn't. Co-written by Jolene Gutiérrez, author of Too Much and Amache and Me, and illustrated by acclaimed illustrator Chris Sasaki, this is an inspiring and powerful picture book. Share it with young readers who are asking questions about justice, belonging, and what it means to be American. Lying in bed at night, Min thinks about things he's lost. His family's home and business, puppy, and most of all, Papa. Min clutches his stone, hoping to see his father again. Hi, Jolene and John. I am so thrilled to have you both on the show today. This book that we're here to talk about today, sincerely, is one of the most beautiful picture books I have ever read. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Before we dive into the book, I do want to acknowledge what a meaningful moment this is. John, your father passed away in 2023 before this book was ready to come into the world. What does it mean to you to see your father's story, his lived story, published as a picture book for children?
Well, my dad, as long as I've known, my dad always told us and whoever he came across the story of his life at camp. And he was also always very interested in educating the next generation so that people know what's happening. And so when he first came to talk to me about, he was talking with this woman named Jolene about, writing this book. And he mentioned that it was going to be a children's book. We thought it'd be really great because there's a lot of books for adults about the incarceration, but there aren't a lot of books for kids, or they're something just hard to find. And so to be able to reach out to kids at a point in their life where they're in the formative years of understanding and making decisions, that he was really excited about it.
I happen to love this woman, Jolene. She's such an amazing human being. And so, Jolene, you worked closely with Min to bring this book to life. Can you take us back to the beginning of that collaboration? How did the two of you find each other? And what was it like working alongside him?
Wow, I did not expect to be emotional this early on. But yeah, I learned about Amache, the incarceration camp in southeastern Colorado, where Min and his family were held, when I was about 12 years old, from my grandparents. And so for me, it was so important to share that story. I didn't learn it in my history classes. I wanted others to know about this history. And as a teacher librarian, I started teaching that history. And then because I also write, I thought, wow, maybe it would be a good thing to have a book out there about Amache, and kind of pulling together interviews and facts and things like that. And I was doing that work. And a friend of mine, Dan Yoshi, said, "Have you talked to Min Tonai?" And I said, no. And he put me in touch with Min. And we talked. I mean, I don't know how long that first time when I called him, but he told me so many powerful stories about his experiences. And I thought, I don't know if it would be as powerful to just lay out a bunch of interviews in a nonfiction book as opposed to telling one person's story. I felt for readers, if they could put themselves in Min's shoes and walk with him through this experience, I thought that might be more powerful. And so I asked if he'd want to work together on telling his story. And that was 2017. And 2023 is when we signed the contract.
Well, John, did your father talk about Amache often growing up, or was it something he shared openly with your family, or something he came to speak about more over time? And what do you most want listeners to know about who he was as a person and as an advocate?
Well, like mentioned, he always talked about Amache. So, I mean, I was born in 1960. I know that maybe 65, 66 is when I remember stories about Amache. He also got my mom to talk about it too, but he mostly talked to family for the longest time. And then my oldest sister was in a class, this amazing class that I got to take in junior high school later on, called American Intercultural Heritage. And Mrs. Boucher was the teacher. And he spoke at my sister's class about the camp. And that would have been in 1971, I think. And that was the first time he spoke to another group of people about the camps. After that, he would there'd be organizations, a lot of schools he talked to, or school groups. Whenever he could, he'd talk about it. Okay, so my dad, as an advocate, my dad was not your typical get out in front of people and stand on a soapbox and present that way. He would more rather talk to people in organizations like school groups, groups of people. And he also was the kind of person that would rather seemingly go behind the scenes and help raise money, help get people organized behind a project, rather than being that person in front, to be that front person. And so sometimes it's really odd to hear the word advocate with my dad, because when I hear advocates, I see people, Jesse Jackson was an advocate in our community. Satsuka Ina is an advocate. And there are people out front, motivating people to do things, being out there leading the charge. And my dad be the person behind them, getting a bunch of other people to listen to them and pay attention to them.
Jolene, as you were kind of recording and shaping Min's memories, were there moments that surprised you, things that he shared that you hadn't expected? And were there things that were difficult for him to revisit while you were having those conversations?
Yes, there were things that surprised me because he shared so much. And I should also say, Densho is an organization that does a lot of oral history recording and sharing of primary sources and things like that. And there are 2 different interviews with Min there where people can go and listen to his stories there as well. But through the stories that he shared with me, and this is part of why I wanted to focus on his stories, he put me there, telling me about at the Assembly Center at Santa Anita and the horse stalls that they were housed in and how they had just been whitewashed with this thin coat of whitewash, and they stank of urine, and there was hair and feces from the horses that had been held there, and they were expected to live there and make a life. I could be there with him through some of the things he shared, the freezing cold at Amache, the sand blowing everywhere through the cracks of the uninsulated barracks and the sand that got in their foods, and then being away from their father because Min's father had been taken right after Pearl Harbor was bombed. So all of the fear and the uncertainty, all of those things, the lack of privacy in the bathrooms, the poor food in the mess halls, all of those things he shared, and that put me there. And I wanted kids and readers to be there and understand how horrible this was.
I guess the second part was that when you were having these discussions, was there any parts of those moments that were difficult for him to express or to get out?
Even though those were horrific times, he was very open and very certain that he wanted to share his stories so that injustices like this would never happen again. And I think that was the fire that I saw in him. I also feel that, but I wanted to be sure that his story lives on because he was telling his story not for himself. He was telling the story so that it never happens again.
I think that part is the key part. And as much as I say that this book, Unbreakable, is one of the most beautiful books, I'm going to say it's one of the most frustrating books because why should it be still relevant today? John, do you want to add anything in there on just why a book like this is important, but also how it's frustrating that it's still important today?
Well, as Jolene said, it's important because the goal is that it never happens again. The fact is, it does. And so, like, for instance, after 9/11, the anti-Islamic thought that went through this country, there were people that immediately blamed anybody from the Midwest. Mideast, they didn't know. But there were some people who knew of the past and knew about the situation about you can't blame an entire group of people for actions of an individual or a small group or even a large group. But if it's their heritage, the place where they come from, it's different than the people that live here. Recently it's been, I guess, very frustrating. I'm glad my dad isn't alive to see this again, because in a way I think it's worse because of the way that American citizens have been targeted, about an entire group of people that have been so productive to our country that are now being attacked because of where they came from. And so I think that when my dad would talk about these things, it wasn't for him. He goes, it wasn't really for me or any of my generation, because he knew that wasn't likely to happen. He wanted us to be aware of it so that in future generations it can happen again.
Yeah.
If people keep forgetting, so I think that's why it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something important to me about this book is that whatever hard things we encounter in life, and obviously what your dad encountered, and I mean, that's too much. No matter what hard thing anybody's experiencing, I think what this book shows is there's a through line of love, and it's our family bonds that can help pull us through these moments. And so there's the image of this stone, the small, smooth rock Min's father places in his hand before being taken by the FBI. And it's really powerful. Jolene, can you talk about how that detail made it into the book and why it became such a central symbol for the story?
Yes. And that detail made it into the book after lots of discussion, because that is the one fictional element within the story. That stone that Min's papa handed to him wasn't actually handed to him at that point. So, and Min was so careful with his stories and the truth that was a really hard thing for him to add. But it is true that Min and his father would go and collect rocks in different places and create different rock gardens, both before and after World War II. And Min's father did have rocks that he brought to Amache. So those pieces are all true. And the rocks in the suitcase that Min's papa had, I heard that story for the first time. I can't tell you how many hours Min and I spent talking and editing and crafting over the years. And I hadn't heard the story of the rocks in the suitcase until 2020. There was a virtual pilgrimage and Min was telling parts of his story, and that was mentioned. And I thought, it's the rocks. Rocks would be this beautiful through line. And Min agreed, but he did not want to include something fictional. So we added in the author's note the fact that piece is fictional. And that, I think, was the right thing to do, because this is not totally nonfiction, because we've added that. And I think that allowed Min to feel okay with us including that symbol of the love and the strength that carried the family through.
Yeah, because these are items, when you think about love and strength, they're not necessarily visible items. They're more what we feel. And I think having that tangible object makes it easier for kids to attach themselves to that message. And I thought it was beautiful. And I don't want to do any spoilers for anybody that hasn't read the book, but just the rocks, the stone, and it culminates into such a lovely ending that it was, I would be surprised that there aren't that many dry eyes at the end of the story. So, well, Jolene, let's stay with you for a moment longer. You mentioned before this conversation that your favorite moment is when Min's father finally arrives at Amache with a suitcase full of rocks from every prison he'd been held in. And the family uses them to make a garden. And it's stunning. So can you talk about what that scene means to you and how it shaped the emotional arc, the rock garden?
Yeah. As I mentioned, that was kind of the aha moment. I am a rock hound myself. Rocks have always been important to me. And so just hearing that, it's like, here is this man who was taken by the FBI, Min's papa was taken by the FBI and held in various different prisons because they kept moving people. And one of the things he chose to do was preserve this time by collecting these rocks. That was just, that to me spoke to his strength of spirit and ability to see beauty in a horrific situation, and then to bring them back and create something with the family, something beautiful, something that was going to stay there after they were gone, because we have college students who do archaeological digs there at Amache and have found some of the different gardens. And different things there. So it lives on and it shows this strength. It took my breath away hearing Min talk about it, and I knew it needed to be part of our story.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja Boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
Well, John, you grew up hearing your father's stories, and, we know that he was active in volunteering, whether that was, supporting the people that were out there with the speakers, right? Many people didn't want to talk about this period at all. And I think that's a common thing whenever there's something hard in our lives, it's often easier not to talk about it. So what was it like to grow up with that history present in your home? And then I guess the second part would be you grew up hearing these stories, and then you get to hold this picture book in your hands and you read the story that's about your dad. And what was it like to have grown up hearing the stories and then now have this beautiful picture book that you can read from a beginning to an end? So just talk to me, I guess, mostly about your feelings about all of that.
Well, the story that was told in this book, with exception of the little rock, is a story that we've heard. So I can verify this is something we've known forever. So the translation from stories to us to the story told through the book is basically the same. Before I do it, let me get something here. So this is one of the rocks that my grandfather brought back. So this is the one that I think came from Santa Fe, went into Amache. They had I think they just put it, they didn't really do what my dad considered a garden at Amache, but had the rocks there. And then he took it home. And then much to my dad's chagrin, my grandfather actually never gave my dad rocks. They got them together. And that was a big difference, is they gather rocks for the gardens and ponds that my grandfather made. But my grandfather gave me a bunch of rocks. And the only rocks that my dad ever really got was my grandfather had got 2 rocks from his hometown in Japan and brought them back to America. And he had put them in the front yard of his house. And then when that house got sold, then we went to my dad's house. And then after we sold my dad's house, my sisters got each one of those because they never got rocks from my grandfather. But I think that when we look at the emotional aspect of the story, my grandfather lost his business. He was very much into a very ambitious business person. He lost his ambition. He lost his drive. When we were growing up, my dad would talk about his life at camp. My mom would talk, even though she mostly did because my dad told her to. And none of my friends I never knew anybody else, my friends, that knew about camp. They knew it existed. They knew that it happened, but anytime they'd ask their grandparents or parents, they wouldn't talk about it. And the only people in my family that knew about the camp is because my dad said it, but we were never allowed to ask my grandparents. It had hurt them so much that my dad said never asked them about camp. And so it's almost like my grandfather giving me these rocks was like his way of. Also, he mostly only spoke Japanese, and I didn't, and he didn't really speak English. So most of our communications were pointing and and grabbing, rocks and things like that, handing it to me. So that's kind of how we connected for a long time.
Yeah. Well, how special that you have that rock there in your hand. And I mean, because it's a listening platform and our listeners can't see the rock.
Yeah.
Do you want to describe the rock? What it looks like and how it feels? And
it's a small, it's maybe 8-inch long piece of petrified wood. It's mostly brown with a couple little light areas of yellows in it too. But it, shows the striations and the rings of the wood.
Well, Jolene, your prose in this book is seamless, it's deliberate, and it builds to that final paragraph of, I think, real emotional resonance. So can you talk about the craft of writing the story? Like how do you find the line between honoring the weight of this history, but keeping it accessible for young readers?
Yes. And we had lots of years to craft this story. And I think that is part of its polish, kind of going back and forth. And we tried this story as a picture book, but we didn't have that through line at that point. And as a shorter middle grade chapter book, and as a graphic novel script, and then back to picture book. So I think having spent that much time with the story helped a lot. Min would write his edits, but he was a businessman, and and then we would go back and forth, and I'd say, Min, we have to remember this is for children, and we have, 1,000 words or less to tell this story. We really have to condense. And so between going back and forth over the years, whittling it down to the most essential parts, you want to tell kids everything so they understand the severity and how horrific the situation was, but you don't have the words and space to tell everything. So you have to whittle it down to the heart, the most essential parts. But I also really firmly believe kids can handle and should hear hard truths. And so including some of the really hard things within the story was really important to me. I wanted, as a teacher and as a parent, I want my kids to feel a little pain so that they can grow as humans, so they can be better. So that's kind of how I approach writing things like this as well. We can't shy away from some of the harder things either. We need to include some of these things that will hurt because the kids are invested, and then they'll hopefully be better humans.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, because Chris Sasaki's illustrations are extraordinary. Were there any images that especially moved you when you first saw them? And John, why don't you go there? Is there like a specific illustration that moved you the most?
It's hard to pick one. And they have, because they moved in different ways. I think to me, the one that almost caused me to catch my breath was the photo, the illustration of the family looking up and have the guard tower ominously in the back, the shadow of the guard tower in the background. I think, but the one I think most of all is the cover. I think that without any words, just, to see, my dad looking back or possibly looking forward, depends on how your point of view of that it's something that he, even as a kid, he claimed he knew that this was going to be important. And it wasn't just like, a lot of other people were just living their day to day. He saw something else in it. And so I think that one does it.
Jolene, what about you?
My favorite, well, I'm with John. Chris's artwork is so powerful, and there are so many images that just make you pause or take your breath away. But I love the end pages with the sunset and Min collecting a rock there on the beach. That to me just feels we're with Min before everything has happened, and we're in this peaceful place, and that's where I wish we could have stayed.
Well, Jolene, as an educator, how do you see teachers and caregivers using this book? Because the back matter is extensive. There's timelines, discussion questions, and a bibliography. So how do you see this being used in a classroom or homeschooling parents? And was that always part of the vision once you knew that it was going to be the picture book, that you wanted to have that back matter so that it could be used in an educational setting?
Yes. As a librarian, I always look for back matter. And as a writer, I usually write back matter and hope that it will get included in books. And so we had a lot, and I wasn't sure if it would all be included, but I thought I'm going to share this with our editor and we'll go from there. And if not, we'll host it on our website or have it available for teachers. And we also have a teacher's guide as well that includes even more information. But I think it is so important. You can't just throw a story like this at students and not have more discussion, either discussion prior to the story. I think definitely discussion after. There are some other picture books about different experiences in incarceration camps. And I think that those would pair very nicely with this book. So hearing from different people's perspectives from different camps, I think would be a really nice way to kind of look at that time period. And using primary source documents, there are so many photos. As I mentioned, Densho has a lot of oral history. So pulling some of those resources to help kids really get themselves into this time period and hear others' voices and others' stories would be a really beautiful way, an intentional way to bring this story to kids.
Yeah, wonderful. And we'll make sure that we've got some of the links to things that you've talked about today in the show notes too. So if anybody wants to dig in further there. John, what do you hope that young readers, so kids who pick this up in a classroom or a library, take away from your father's story?
I think it probably goes back to what Jolene said about my dad being a businessman. And for years, a lot of his stories had to do with camp, the factual things about what happened. And I kept trying to get him to talk more about his story directly. And Jolene didn't really mention this about the interviews with my dad. My dad is famous for 3 or 4 hour interviews with people. So the information that you get from him is enormous. And, for Jolene to be able to whittle that down to this book was just amazing. And to capture him. I thought she did a really good job of capturing him. And part of what that is, I've known him as an adult, obviously, all my life. And I don't know if that story that he told back then a kid could relate to. And so for a kid today to read the book and to maybe see a little bit of themselves in some way, it doesn't have to be as horrid, or it could be worse, a worse tragedy than what my parents went through. But I think that I thought he and Jolene did a good job of making a story that could be approached by a lot of people. I also think that it's maybe more about the parents than the kids, because if the kid just reads the book and they like the book, it will, I think, it'll affect them and it'll influence them. But I think if the book could be read by the kid and the parent together, and they can discuss it, and then they can bring in what's happening with different groups of people today. It's something that becomes repeated. It's something that becomes a greater part of their life than it would be if it was just, read the book, I like the book. I mean, I had favorite books when I was a little kid, but they're stories. They weren't anything important. So I think that when you look at this book, and it's targeted for a younger group of people, but I think it could still apply. A kid in a big world for me would be a kid reads a book with the parents. They talk about it. Parents go out on a date. They get a babysitter. The kid brings out their favorite book, and then they have the babysitter read it. And the babysitter then they can have a discussion and go on and on from there. And to me, that would be something I think my dad would really love.
Yeah. There are a few different reasons, of course, that I love to read kids' books, any kind of book. And I think something that comes up for me often is I love a book that when I get to the last page of the story, I feel something strongly. And that can be laughter, it can be joy, it can be sadness, it can be this emotional resonance. But this book, I get to the last page and am left with so many feelings. So that's what I love about it. But I also, to what you're both saying, I love a discussion book, a book that when you're done, you need to talk about it and you want to talk about it. And it can lead you down a path to becoming a better human being because you've read it. So I loved what you said, John, because that's why I love this book so much, is because it's a feeling book, but it's also a discussion book. And those are so important. Jolene, Min passed away before seeing this book published. Do you find yourself thinking about what he would have felt as you hold the finished copy? And what do you hope he would have said to you?
Yeah, I do. And the first time I signed a copy, because I had gotten my author's copies and I was signing my name and realizing I'm never going to see his name signed beside mine, was really hard. But I think, so yes, I think about him all the time and wish that he could see it and hope that in some way he does. But I know he knew this story was living on. We had signed the contract. He had helped choose Chris as the illustrator. He knew it was coming. And I hope that gave him great peace and joy. And we're doing everything, John and his sisters and friends and everyone who believes in this book and everybody at Abrams, we're doing everything we can to just make sure this story reaches as many readers as possible. And in that way, Min lives on.
Yeah. Well, John, as Jolene just said, your father signed the book contract and was even part of choosing Chris as the illustrator before he passed. So you and your sisters, Susan and Teresa, have done so much to help bring this book into the world since then. So as, your father's children, what was the process like for your family? And what do you think it would have meant to your dad to see it finally here and finished and being read by people?
Well, oh boy, it's hard to say what I think he would have felt. I think he would have felt proud of it. I think that he wished it to be 10 times longer. When it's, I want to kind of go back to something about Jolene said about when she signed the book. Something that my sister and I, the hardest thing we've been working on, I think, the hardest thing to do has been, we're trying to figure out when we go to events and, let's say we're there with Chris or we're there with Jolene, is how do we sign for my dad? That's been the hardest thing because we can't just sign his name. It isn't him. And he was very proud of his Japanese heritage, and we decided to get, we're hoping to find his hanko, his stamp. It got packed and moving, and we don't know where it is right now. I know we saved it, but we don't know where it is. And also the ink takes so long to dry, that probably wouldn't have been practical. And so my sister Teresa designed a hanko for him. And we're, even at this point, we're still trying to figure out how to deal with that, because we endorse the book. We know he would have endorsed the book, but it's not ours. And so his story, unfortunately, won't be told in his voice anymore. And this is one of the ways. This and any number of the interviews that he's had are his way of being around for people. But I think that when we look at this book and we think about, okay, what what my dad had said about it. He would always talk about just the camp, and then he started eventually talking about his life. And talking about his life was difficult. He was in accounting. He was very much into numbers, not stories. He was a very good storyteller, but it's something where I think that I wish you could have seen it. I wish I could have heard from him what exactly he felt about it. And I think that's one of the joys of a book. It's the words are there, they're fixed, they're finite, but the interpretations are infinite. And I would hope that he could, that people can get their life, their story out of his story. And I think that's what he'd want to.
That's another favorite thing for me about books is, as a writer, or, your dad was the storyteller sharing the story, and Jolene found the way to put it into the words. So even if it's your dad's story and partly Jolene's story now, it also becomes neither of their story once it lands into the reader's hands, and it becomes the reader's story and what they choose to do with it and move forward with what they've taken. So, John, what a beautiful response. I love that response. Jolene, if there was just one thing that our listeners took away from our conversation today, what would you want that to be?
Wow. I think the importance of hearing other stories and recording them while they're here, that's something I encourage my students to. I love oral history, and both of my parents have passed, and once people in our lives that we love are gone, those stories to a certain extent are gone if we didn't take the time to listen to them or preserve them. So that would be kind of my suggestion for listeners, is to take the time to sit down with those you love and listen.
I'm hesitant to say, John, do you want to add anything there? Like one final thing to share with listeners?
Yeah. I think because my dad talked about his life growing up so much. I remember there was a point where, especially camp, none of my friends knew about camp. Most of my relatives didn't really know about camp other than it existed. And we were so tired growing up of hearing about camp. And when I did a photo project where I photographed Amache. And so Amache's unique among the 10 camps that the foundations are still there. And so he told me his barrack number, and I could walk through his front door into his room. And at that time, I just had kind of forgotten a lot of his stories. But because I heard so many times, and when I walked through that, and I could see the stories that he told me, I could walk down the road that he walked down with his friends, and all those things, I think are important to not just listen to their stories, but let them repeat it. Let it become so much, you hear it so much, you may get tired of it for a while, but eventually you'll really learn to appreciate that. And it's like when if the culture, like a Native American culture, is where they've got that narrative culture, that the stories get handed down by story, not by written word, but by story, and it's repeated over and over again. I think that's really important. I didn't understand that until that day at Amache, when I realized that all the stuff that on the surface I'd forgotten, all were deeply ingrained in me.
Well, John and Jolene, thank you so much to both of you for being here and for sharing Min's story with such care and generosity. John, it's clear that your father's spirit is very much alive in this book and in the people who loved him. And the way you and your sisters, Susan and Teresa, have helped carry this project forward is a beautiful testament to that. And Jolene, the gift you've given young readers, and honestly, as John said, readers of all ages, because hopefully the parents and teachers and educators are sharing this alongside the kids. But you've given the young readers, in bringing this story to the page, it's just something so truly special. The special, Unbreakable is exactly that. It's special. And I hope everyone listening will pick up a copy and share it widely, because I'm going to go full circle back to the beginning. This is one of the most beautiful books that I have ever read. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this quest for growing readers. If this conversation stirred something in you, please go pick up a copy of Unbreakable. This is the kind of book that belongs in every home, every classroom, and every library. It is a book you will want to read more than once and press into the hands of everyone you know. You'll find links in the show notes to order your copy. Visit Jolene's website and explore the Unbreakable website hosted by the Tonai family, where you can dig deeper into Min's story and the history of Amache. And please share this episode. Share it with a teacher, a parent, a librarian, or a friend. Share it with anyone who believes that stories have the power to make us more human, more compassionate, and more determined to do better. Because that is exactly what Unbreakable does, and what this conversation with Jolene and John so beautifully reminded us. Min Tonai spent his life making sure this story was told so that history would not repeat itself. The least we can do is help it reach as many hearts as possible. Until next time, keep reading, keep sharing, and keep growing. The Growing Readers podcast is a production of the Children's Book Review. For more outstanding children's books like Unbreakable, a Japanese-American family in an American incarceration camp, I hope you'll visit us at thechildrensbookreview.com.